The miner who heard the mountain breathe. At the grand reopening of a billion-dollar mine in front of the investors and the cameras, a man pressed his ear to a ventilation pipe and told them all to run. Elijah Grant had his palm flat against the cold steel of the main air duct. His head tilted, his eyes closed, and when he straightened up, his face had gone the color of ash. "Evacuate," he said. "Now. Everyone out of the lower levels." The CEO laughed. Rebecca Voss stood in her hard hat that had never seen a day of real dust in front of the men whose money had reopened Black Ridge, and she made Elijah into the entertainment. "You hear something," she said to the delight of the investors. "What is it? What is it, Mr. Grant? Is the mountain talking to you?" "No," Elijah said. "It's breathing backward." She fired him on the spot. It was a performance for the crowd, a way to turn a frightening moment into a punchline, the difficult old ventilation man. Dismissed with a wave of a manicured hand. Security already moving to walk him out before he could ruin the photographs. The investors chuckled. Wade Turner smiled. It was, everyone agreed later, a very smooth recovery, right up until it wasn't. And as they took him by the arm, every wind flag in the mine tunnel, the little strips of ribbon that hang in the airways to show which way the air moves, all of them at once, along the whole length of the drift, turned and streamed the wrong way, and a low groan of metal rolled up through the rock, and everyone felt it come up through the soles of their boots. Before the mountain finishes what it started, subscribe, because this story turns 4 times on the question of who is actually to blame, and the man who caused the first disaster did it to prevent a worse one, and you will not see that coming. And carry one question down into the dark with you. Would you believe a warning, a real one, a life or death one, if the person giving it had no title, no power, and no reason you could see to be right that morning hours before the ceremony? Elijah Grant had already known something was wrong, because he was the only one still listening to the mountain instead of the dashboard. He had spent decades in the ventilation trade reading the movement of air through rock, the way a sailor reads wind on water. Air in a mine is life. It carries the oxygen in and the poison out, and a man who understands its currents understands whether the people below are going to breathe. Elijah understood it in his hands and his ears and the fine hairs on his arms, and he had once, years ago, cleared a whole crew out, minutes before a gas pocket that would have killed them. And for that he had been thanked and never promoted, because the industry rewards the men who make the numbers look good, not the men who keep the numbers honest. Black Ridge had been reopened on the strength of a new automated ventilation system, a network of sensors and dashboards that promised to run the airways better than any human could. The CEO, Rebecca Voss, had come up as a geologist once long ago, but she had climbed so high that she now trusted the dashboard more than the rock, because the dashboard could be presented to investors, and the rock could not. She needed Black Ridge to be safe, needed it visibly, provably, profitably safe, and the reopening was the proof. The mine supervisor, Wade Turner, was paid on production bonus, on tonnage, and he had decided from the first day that Elijah Grant was a troublemaker, whose warnings slowed the work and cost him money. Wade used every tool he had to discredit the old ventilation man and the tools he reached for. Most were the cheapest ones. The assumptions, the little digs. The way he'd introduce Elijah to the investors as our resident folklore department, while calling his own dashboards the data. It was a familiar trick, and Elijah had seen it his whole career. Take a man's decades of hard-won knowledge and rename it superstition. Take your own convenient numbers and call them science, and let everyone in the room draw the conclusion you need them to draw about which man to listen to. It worked because it was easy, and because the people it worked on wanted it to. That morning, Elijah had walked the airways the way he always did. He checked the wind flags. He watched the canaries. The maintenance team still kept a couple of sensitive birds out of tradition, and they were agitated, restless in a way that had nothing to do with anyone's grandchildren, and everything to do with the air. He lit a stick of safety smoke and watched the way it moved, and at one junction where the dashboard on the wall swore everything was normal. Green across the board, the smoke curled backward and got sucked down into a return that should have been pushing air out. There was a place in the mountain. Pulling air the wrong way, and pulling air the wrong way means pulling something up out of the deep that you do not want to breathe. Wade Turner found him crouched there with the smoke. "You spooking the birds again, old man," Wade said loud enough for the two junior miners nearby to hear. "We've got 40 sensors down this drift, and you're playing with a smoke stick and a couple of canaries like it's 1902. The board loves your act, they really do. Very authentic. But the dashboard's green, so unless the dashboard's lying, why don't you go find something to sweep?" "The dashboard's not lying," Elijah said, standing, watching the smoke crawl the wrong way. "It's averaging. There's a difference. An average keeps you comfortable. The air keeps you alive. Those aren't the same number today." Wade laughed and walked off, and one of the junior miners looked at the backward smoke a little too long before following him. The dashboard did not show it. And that was the whole problem, and it took Elijah a while to understand the mechanism. The automated system was averaging. It took readings from across the whole mine and reported the average, and the average looked beautiful, well within every safety threshold, because a system that averages a clean airway and a poisoned pocket reports a number that is perfectly lethally fine. The dashboard was not lying exactly. It was telling a comfortable statistical truth that would kill the specific men standing in the specific bad spot. An average is a kind of mercy for the people who read reports and a kind of murder for the people who breathe the air. Elijah had spent his life in the gap between those two, and he knew exactly how wide it was and how many men had died in it. He filed a report. He wrote it up properly, formally flagging the reverse airflow and the averaging problem, and he submitted it through the system. And when he checked it later, his digital signature on the report had been changed to a safety approval. Someone had reached into the record and turned his warning into its opposite, his name now attached to a sign-off, saying the airways were clear. Lena Graves, the labor safety representative, saw it happen. She was at the next terminal when Elijah's report came through, flagged red, and she watched over the following hour. The flag turned green, and his name migrate onto an approval he had never given. She knew what she was looking at. She had been pressured into signing things before, had felt the specific cold weight of a supervisor standing behind your chair while you put your name to a thing you don't believe, and she was afraid, and so she said nothing, and closed the window, and told herself it wasn't her fight. Her fear would matter later, both for what it cost and for how in the dark she would finally answer for it. Then came the ceremony, and the descent into the new lower levels for the cameras, and Elijah's hand on the pipe, and the word evacuate, and his firing, and the flags turning backward, and the groan in the rock. The collapse came minutes after they walked him out while Elijah was still in the parking lot, and the investors were still underground, admiring the new lower levels for the cameras. It was not a Hollywood explosion. It was worse in the way. Real things are worse. A deep shifting groan and then a fall of rock somewhere below felt more than heard a shudder that ran up through the mountain and made the surface buildings rattle. When the dust cleared on the readouts, the main haulage road was cut, and the lower workings were sealed, and trapped on the wrong side of it were the ceremony party. Rebecca Voss, the investors, the board members, the very people who had stood laughing at the old man with his ear to the pipe not 1 hour before. Elijah was already at the surface, already dismissed, already free to get in his truck and drive away from a company that had humiliated him and let the mountain deal with the people who had done it. He stood in the parking lot with his truck keys in his hand. This is worth sitting with. It is the real hinge of the man. An hour ago they had fired him in front of cameras, made him a joke, walked him out by the arm. His truck was right there. The road home was right there. And the people trapped below were the exact people who had laughed. No one on earth would have blamed Elijah Grant for getting in that truck and driving away and letting the dashboard they trusted so much come dig them out. He put the keys back in his pocket. He went back in. He did not go back in as a hero in a movie goes back in. High went back through an old ventilation shaft he knew from decades of work, a route not on the current maps, and before he went he made the rescue coordinator log his entry into the command record, insisted on it. Made them write down that Elijah Grant had gone in at this time on this authority, because he had learned that a man who does the saving without a record is a man who gets blamed for the dying. That command log was going to matter. He made sure of it before he ever went into the dark. Below, in the trapped group, the ugliness of people under pressure came out fast. One investor, gasping, demanded that the limited emergency oxygen be given to him first on the logic that his life was worth more. "Give me a mask," the investor said when Elijah's light found the group, huddled in the sealed drift. "I'll pay. Name it. I have conditions. My lungs, I need it more than these. You'll get one when it's your turn," Elijah said, not unkindly, already counting heads, already reading which corner of the chamber held the worst air. "And your turn is decided by where you're standing, not what you're worth." He handed the first mask to a young miner, nearest the bad return, then to Rebecca, who was closest to the seeping gas, then worked outward by exposure, by need, coldly, fairly an ethic of the airway that did not care about shares or titles or who had laughed at him an hour ago. "Down here," he said to the whole trapped group. "The mountain's the only shareholder, and it pays everybody exactly the same. It set the terms of everything that followed, and the investor who had spent his life at the front of every line learned in the dark what it was to wait his turn." The first turn came when Elijah, moving through the trapped section, realized the mine was not digging for what it had told the public. It was digging for the new workings. The ones that had reopened Black Ridge were not chasing the coal or the base metals in the permits. They were driving toward a hidden seam of strategic minerals, valuable and restricted, and the drilling had crossed a boundary, had gone under land the company had no right to mine, and in doing so, had punched into a sealed cave system, an old void full of trapped gas and dead air, and that was why the mountain was breathing backward. They had opened a lung that was never meant to be opened. He found it by the ore in the muck, a glitter in the fresh-cut rock that had no business in a coal mine, and by the direction of the new drifts which drove not toward any seam in the permits, but sideways under the ridge toward land. Elijah knew for a fact Black Ridge had no right to touch. "This isn't a coal mine anymore," he said quietly, running his light along the illegal face. "They reopened this whole operation to chase something else, and they drove it underground. They don't own, and they punched a hole into a dead cave doing it. That's your backward breathing. That's the whole thing. The mountain's not sick. It's been cut into somewhere. It was sealed shut, and now it's exhaling something that's been sitting airless for 10,000 years. Rebecca Voss. Listening went very still, because the drift he was pointing at did not match a single map she had ever been shown. The second turn was Rebecca Voss, and it refused to make her either innocent or a simple villain. Trapped in the dark with the men she'd led down there, she genuinely believed the permits were legitimate. She had been shown forged maps, doctored boundaries, a beautiful lie assembled by Wade Turner and elements of the board to keep her signing budgets without asking where the drill was actually going. She was a victim of the fraud. And yet she had ignored Elijah's warning, had fired him for it. In front of cameras, had chosen the comfortable dashboard over the uncomfortable rock because the discomfort threatened her position. And so she was also responsible fully for being in this dark on this day. Both things were true. "I ignored him," Rebecca said in the dark mask in her hand. She said it to no one or to herself. "He put his ear to the pipe and told me to run, and I made him the punchline. I fired him for saving my life." She looked at Elijah. "I was a geologist once. I knew how to read rock. And somewhere up there in that chair I decided the screen was easier to trust than the stone because the screen agreed with me and the stone didn't." It was not an apology exactly. It was worse and more honest than an apology. It was a woman naming the exact place she had gone wrong, and it did not make her innocent, and she knew it didn't. Over the radio, Wade Turner's voice reached them from the surface. "I can get you out," Wade said, warm, reasonable, the voice of a man holding all the cards. "I can put the emergency bore right on top of you in 3 hours. But I'm going to need something in writing first. A statement. Everybody agrees the ventilation failure traces to Grant's mismanagement. Grant's report, Grant's negligence. You all sign that and I dig. That's the deal." He made it sound like paperwork. It was a ransom, and the currency was an old man's name, and in the dark, with the air thinning, some of them terrified said yes. The group split right there between the ones who would buy their lives with a lie and the ones who would not. And Elijah stood in the middle of it and did not argue for himself, because a man arguing for his own name is easy to doubt. The third turn came from a man Elijah thought was his enemy. A geologist named Dr. Samuel Orr had been sabotaging Elijah's gas monitors, and when Elijah caught him at it, he was certain he'd found Wade's inside man. But Orr was not protecting the company. Orr had discovered something worse than a gas pocket the board had planted. Time charges deep in the illegal workings, meant to bring the whole section down and bury the evidence of the unpermitted mining, then collect the insurance and call it a natural collapse. Orr had been part of the illegal drilling and had turned against it, and he had triggered the first small collapse himself deliberately, at a controlled scale to seal off the drift, before the big charges could go and kill everyone. His sabotage of Elijah's monitors was an attempt to keep Elijah from reading the gas signature that would lead him toward the charges and set them off early. "You've been breaking my monitors," Elijah said, pinning Orr's arm, the man's little tool still in his hand. "You're Wade's. You've been blinding me this whole time. I've been keeping you from reading the gas near the north face," Orr said, fast, desperate. "Because if you read it, you'd go looking for the source, and the source is sitting on top of a shelf of time charges the board planted to bring this whole illegal section down and call it an accident and collect on it. If you'd set those off early, tracing the gas, we'd all be paced already. The small collapse, the one that trapped us, that was me. I dropped that drift on purpose at a scale I could control to seal us off from the big charges before they blow. I'm not trying to kill you, Grant. I've been trying to keep you from getting us killed while I figure out how to get us out." Elijah looked at him for a long moment. Here was the man who had caused the disaster, telling him the disaster was the only thing that had kept them alive so far. It was true, and it was monstrous both at once. Orr had been part of the illegal drilling, had helped make this, and had turned at the end and made a choice that saved lives by nearly ending them. And Elijah had to decide in the dark with the air running out whether to trust him. And then Lena Graves found her voice, and it broke the group open. She admitted to everyone that the old safety report she had signed under pressure years ago was the very document that had allowed the illegal drilling to proceed. That her fear had been a link in the chain that put them all down here. 2 years ago, I signed a safety clearance I knew was wrong, Lena said to the whole group, her voice shaking but not stopping. Wade stood behind my chair and I signed it. That clearance is the reason the drilling was allowed to go where it went. It's the reason we're down here. I've known that for an hour. Standing here, and I've been too much of a coward to say it, same as I was too much of a coward to say it 2 years ago. She made herself look at them. So I'm saying it now. My fear is part of what put us in this dark. And if we get out, I'll say it up there too, on the record, whatever it costs me. Her confession was not absolution. It was accountability spoken aloud, and it did the thing that accountability does, which is make it possible for others to tell the truth. One of the men who had agreed to sign Wade's statement looked at the floor, and then said quietly that he took it back. Then another. One by one, the people who had agreed to blame Elijah began to reclaim themselves because someone had gone first. The survival itself came down to the air, which is where it had always been going to come down. Elijah watched the methane climb on Orr's one working meter, and he did the grim arithmetic out loud, because Lena had taught him an hour and a lifetime ago not to hold the math alone. So many minutes until the gas reached the explosive range where a single spark from a boot nail on rock or a dying headlamp would turn the whole chamber into a furnace. Less time than that until the backup breathing packs ran dry, and the water Orr's collapse had disturbed was rising in the lower drift, eating the easy way out minute by minute. He named each clock as it started, and each one they lost so that everyone in the dark knew exactly how much of everything was left, because people face accountable danger better than an unnameable one. The way out was the air itself. Reverse the ventilation. Turn the fans and push the poison out and pull clean air down, a controlled reversal of the exact backward breathing that had started the whole terrible day. Rebecca Voss pulled up the ventilation controls on a hardened panel in the sealed drift and entered her credentials, the CEO's master authority, the highest access in the company. Access denied. She entered them again, certain it was a mistake. Access denied. "That's not possible," she said. "I run this company. I have authority over every system in it." "Not anymore," Elijah said, reading the screen over her shoulder. "Admin control of the ventilation got moved to Wade 3 weeks ago. Look, your own access is read only now." And there it was, laid bare in the dark, the thing the whole story had been circling. A title is not power. The CEO of Black Ridge could not turn a single fan in her own mine. The people who had built the fraud had quietly taken the one control that mattered and left her the chair and the nameplate and the illusion. And now, Wade Turner, from the safety of the control room on the surface, began changing the fan settings, not to help them, but to push the rising methane toward the trapped group, to finish quietly what the timed charges had been meant to do, loudly. Elijah did not defeat him with a clever trick at a keyboard. He did it with the mountain. He knew the airways as physical things, and he had spent a lifetime tapping on pipes to test them, a rhythm 3 short and 3 long that carried through the metal and the rock. He put a wrench to the steel of the main duct, and he hammered 3 short and 3 long, the same rhythm he'd used his whole career to test a pipe for a void, except now he was not testing, he was calling. The pattern traveled through the metal and into the rock, and along the seams that connect one working to another under the ridge, because mountains are not separate, the way the maps pretend, and rock carries a rhythm, a long way to an ear that knows how to listen. Across the ridge at a neighboring operation, an old hand Elijah had worked with 30 years ago felt 3 short, 3 long come up through the floor of his own drift, and stopped and listened, and felt it again, and knew the way. Only another old ventilation man could know that someone was trapped, and calling in the only language the mountain would carry. He relayed it up his own shaft to his own surface, to people Wade Turner had no authority over, and help began to move, that no control room could stop, summoned by a wrench and a rhythm and a lifetime of 2 men learning to listen to stone. And here the story made its hardest demand, the one the outline had promised. Elijah could not save them alone, and more than that, he did not have the right to. He had 2 ways out. One ran through the flooding lower drift and was faster and more dangerous. One ran through the unmapped cave the drilling had opened slower, uncertain but away from the charges. Elijah, the expert, the only one who understood the air, wanted to simply choose. "This way," Elijah started to say, pointing toward the cave. "We go through the chow stop." Lena Graves put a hand on his arm. "You don't get to decide for all of us. That's the whole thing, Elijah. That's what put us down here in the first place." Wade decided. The board decided. Rebecca decided to trust her dashboard. One person deciding for everybody every time, and the rest of us just breathing what they left us. She held his eyes. "You're the one who knows the air. So you lay out both ways honest, all the risk, and then we choose, together. Or we're no better than the chair." And it landed on him because she was right. and because it was the exact lesson the whole day had been trying to teach him, that being the one who could hear the mountain did not make him the one who got to decide who lived. So he laid out both paths, honestly. The flooding lower drift, faster a known route, but the water was rising and the timing was a gamble. The unmapped cave the drilling had opened slower, uncertain no map but away from the charges and the water. He gave them the truth of each, and he did not wait it, and the group chose together, and they chose the cave. They went through it in single file in the dark, and they carried with them the two things that could never be edited or averaged away: the physical map of the illegal workings, sketched on paper by hand, and a chunk of the strategic or the hard evidence of what Black Ridge had really been digging for, cradled in a miner's arms like something newborn. "Go," Orr said at the mouth of the cave, planting himself by the charge controls. "I set this in motion. Somebody has to hold the trigger to make sure the last charge drops the illegal face behind you so the evidence stays sealed, and nobody follows the gas out. It should be me. It's the one right thing I've got left." "No," Elijah said. He said it flatly, without drama, the way he said everything. "You've decided. You get to die to make yourself feel clean. That's just deciding for everybody. Again dressed up as sacrifice. There's a mechanical timer on that panel. We set it. We all walk the charge drops on a delay with nobody standing next to it." He took Orr by the collar and turned him toward the cave. "Nobody else dies in this mountain today. Not the men who trusted the dashboard, and not the man who caused the collapse. You want to make it right. Walk out and testify. That's harder than dying, and it's worth more." He did not believe in unnecessary sacrifice, and he would not let the story be redeemed by a corpse. They set the timer on the last charge, and they went single file through the unmapped cave, the young miner cradling the oar, Lena carrying the hand-drawn map, Elijah at the front reading the air with his palm in his ears because there was no dashboard down here to lie to him, only the mountain telling the truth, the way it always had. The neighboring crew's help reached the far side and reversed the fans through the shared system, and clean air came down at last, pushing the methane back, and a pressure door that had not been opened in a generation groaned open under Elijah's hands. They climbed out into the gray morning light, all of them, the miners and the investors and the CEO and the geologist and the safety rep, coughing, blinking, alive. Minutes before the last charge, dropped the illegal section down behind them, sealing nothing, achieving nothing, because the evidence it was meant to bury was already walking out into the daylight on their backs and in their arms. Wade Turner met them at the surface with the story already built, telling the arriving authorities and the cameras that the ventilation system had suffered a tragic automated failure that no one could have predicted. It that the automation everyone had trusted had simply terribly failed. It was a good story. Automation is a wonderful thing to blame, because it has no face and cannot testify. But the command log could. The one Elijah had insisted the rescue coordinator write when he went in hours ago. Before any of this, the record he had made them keep out of 30 years of learning that a man who saves without a record gets blamed for the dying. It captured his own entry, yes. And it captured time-stamped in sequence every command Wade Turner had sent from that control room during the emergency. Every fan setting he had changed, and the direction he had changed them, which was to push methane toward a chamber full of trapped human beings. The mountain had not malfunctioned. The automation had done exactly what it was told. Wade Turner had told it to kill people, and it was written down in his own hand on the record he thought no one had been keeping. The reckoning sorted into layers because the guilt had layers. Wade Turner, who had faked the maps and tried to bury a group of people for the insurance, faced the heaviest of it. The board members who had built the incentives and locked the CEO out of her own safety system faced their own. There were 4 layers to the blame, and the reckoning honored all 4, because a disaster this size is never one person's. There was Wade Turner, who had forged the maps and turned the fans on trapped people for an insurance payout, and his was the deepest layer. There was the board who had built the incentives that made Wade possible and quietly stripped the CEO of the one control that could have stopped him. There was Rebecca Voss, who had not committed the fraud, but had ignored the warning and fired the messenger because the truth was inconvenient to her position. And there was the layer that included Samuel Orr and Lena Graves, and if he was honest, a younger version of Elijah, too. The people who had stayed silent or made dangerous choices out of fear, telling themselves there was no other way. The law would sort the top layers. But the story insisted that the bottom layer answer too, because a mine, like anything else, is brought down as much by the silence of the frightened as by the greed of the powerful. Rebecca Voss, who had ignored the warning and fired the messenger. Resigned testified against the board and directed her own equity toward compensating the workers, and she was not celebrated as a savior because she had chosen the dashboard over the man who could hear the mountain, and people had nearly died for it, and no amount of doing the right thing afterward erases the day you did the wrong one. Samuel Orr and Lena Graves, who had stayed silent or made dangerous choices out of fear, faced the consequence of those choices too, because good intentions and terror do not unendanger the people you put at risk. Elijah Grant was offered the CEO's chair. He turned it down. I had watched what the chair did to the people who sat in it, how it lifted them so far above the rock that they could no longer hear it. Instead, he took the leadership of a new safety authority, one elected by the miners themselves, with real power to stop the work, and the mine did not reopen until an independent assessment cleared it, and the land it had illegally crossed was protected. The right to stop the job, the thing they had stripped from him at the ceremony when they fired him for saying evacuate, became a written right for every worker. At Black Ridge, printed on the wall at the mine entrance, in letters a foot high, any worker may halt operations on their own judgment of danger, without penalty, without appeal, without argument. It was the whole story compressed into a single posted rule. Because the entire disaster, every layer of it, had come down to one thing. A man who could see the danger had not been allowed to stop the work, and the people who could stop the work had not been able to see the danger. Elijah made sure the next person who heard the mountain breathing backward could halt everything with a word and keep their job, and never once be walked out by security, or made into the entertainment for a room full of investors. The last image is Elijah Grant alone at the mouth of the reopened mine on the first honest day, his palm flat against the cold steel of the air duct, his head tilted, listening, and the air is moving the right way in and down and around and out the way it should, the way it must for men to live below. There is a young ventilation tech beside him now, someone he is training, someone the new safety authority pays to learn the trade, the honest way. She asks him what the dashboard says. He tells her the dashboard is fine. The dashboard is always fine. That's the trouble with it. Then he shows her how to lay her palm flat on the steel and close her eyes and feel which way the air wants to go, because a number can be averaged and a signature can be changed and a map can be forged. But the air moving over your skin cannot be argued with. He straightens up and he says to her, to the mountain, to no one, that it never once lied to anybody. Only people lie, he says, about what they take from it. The mountain just breathes. And the whole job, the entire trade, the meaning of his difficult, unpromotable, honest life, is only ever to listen to it truly, and to have the courage to say out loud what you hear, even when the person who has to hear it is standing in a clean hard hat in front of the cameras, laughing. The young tech lays her palm on the steel beside his and closes her eyes, and after a moment, her brow furrows because she has felt it. The faint pull of the air, the mountain breathing. And Elijah watches her learn the one thing no dashboard will ever teach, which is how to trust what your own body is telling you in a world built to talk you out of it. So here is the question I'll leave you with. Would you believe a warning, a real one, when the person giving it has no title, no power, and no reason you can see to be right? Rebecca Voss laughed at the old man with his ear to the pipe, and it nearly killed her. Elijah Grant had heard the mountain his whole life, and it had never once lied to him. The only question was whether anyone would listen before the flags turned backward. If this story reached you, subscribe and tell me in the comments about a time you knew something was wrong and no one would believe you until it was almost too late.